Outsiders. Good morning, and welcome to Outsiders, the show that is to woke virtue signalling, anti-Semitism on steroids, and identity politics. What singing silly slogans like "my pronouns aren't preferred, they are mandatory" is to separating the men from the boys.
My pronouns aren't preferred, they are mandatory.
Okay, how the f*** am I supposed to know when I'm only meeting someone on the go and I'm not allowed to guess by how they look or how they dress or by what they got that's going on below?
Yes, it appears not everybody is on board with the cult of the personal pronoun.
See, on this topic, I'm a little gray. When meeting someone new, what do I say? Because if I have to start our talk asking if you have a then you're not my kind of person anyway.
You know, Ron and Rita, I'm just going to go out on a limb here. I don't think we're going to need to ask what his pronouns are, preferred or otherwise.
And just one more little thing before I'm gone. Respect is earned, it's not demanded in a song. If you want to be a she or a they, a or a z, good for you, but you can't make me play along.
Fantastic. Respect is earned. Yes, we all know that. And now let's grab the latest Outsiders news. It would appear, Rita, that Dan Andrews is not happy with Sky After Dark.
Well, poor Dan. It's been rough in retirement. Golf clubs don't want him. He's been taken to task at a gala event where he was there, you know, at the who's who of Melbourne, and now he's just having a tantrum. This is unseemly for a former Victorian Premier, blabbering on about he was just doing what needed to be done and how proud he is of his legacy. I mean, the state is stuffed. We've got the highest debt of any state or territory in the country, yet he seems to be utterly in denial about the angst that he's receiving in retirement.
Let's have a listen to the great dictator Dan himself. Oh, sorry, you can't say dictator. That's Sky After Dark, isn't it, Dan? Of course, none of your behaviour, Dan Andrews, would ever have earned the moniker a dictator. You know, firing on your own people with rubber bullets, tasering them, throwing women to the ground, strangling them, getting women in their pyjamas. No, there's nothing dictatorial about any of that. It's all Sky After Dark's imagination. Still, let's hear from the man himself.
All this nonsense, you know, centralisation of power and, you know, control freakness and all this sort of stuff. This is all bull. Look, you have to have that. Otherwise you just become listless. You're just adrift.
Doesn't sound very happy, James, does he?
Well, he sounds listless. He sounds listless. He sounds like he's actually gaslighting hugely around securing his record, because you mentioned a few of the things there, Ron. But let's not forget some of the other things. We're talking about the longest lockdowns, some of the longest lockdowns in the entire Western world outside of Wuhan during the pandemic. We are talking about all of the debacles that went along with that. You know, we saw the protests and stuff, which we've seen many times on this show. But hang on, and the fact is that they had the worst performance on COVID of any state in the nation, and they were just absolutely proved, you know, our point that we were making all along, that whole approach to COVID was completely wrong. We were right. That's why he hates us.
Well, and he also just made some absolutely absurd claims about us pushing Matthew Guy. We've done nothing but bash Matthew Guy and now John Prosciutto, who's also utterly hopeless. And this is the part of Dan's legacy, that he is seen as this master politician because he won consecutive terms, big landslides, despite having such a terrible record. But it's because he had no opposition. And if you have no opposition, surprise, surprise, you're probably going to do well electorally. And he has. And yet there is this deep disdain for him from so many, including Labor people. And it goes much deeper than the COVID response, which, yes, was uniquely bad. But you look at the state as far as the corruption scandals we've had, any one of them would have seen a premier lose their position in Queensland or New South Wales. This week, we had another report come out from the Ombudsman, Deborah Glass, showing just again the bureaucracy corrupted by politics, too scared to challenge, power being centralised in Dan Andrews' office whilst he was there, and his massive staff numbers. He had more staff than the Prime Minister and the New South Wales Premier combined.
Unbelievable.
Well, James, they were, those was all of those staff. Much of those staff was about polling, doing focus groups, doing issues management, doing stuff that's not really about the administration of the state, but about the maintenance of the Premier's image. And that's how we wound up with that whole weird cult of Dan story. But I want to pick up on something as we move to the next topic, because what you said there, Rita, was absolutely correct, that the opposition in Victoria has been hopeless. It was hopeless under Matthew Guy. It's hopeless under John Prosciutto. Whereas if you look at what's happening on a national level here, federally, we're seeing a Liberal Party that is not more obsessed with fighting Conservatives and getting Conservatives out of the party, which is what's been happening in both New South Wales and Victoria, and also seeing a leader who is actually leading on issues. And what's really interesting, we've had the big drops all over the papers this weekend about how they're going to announce a big migration review. Well, this is, again, another instance where I think Peter Dutton is driving national policy and forcing Albanese to react. He did this first with the detention, mandatory detention of the detainees from the High Court, and now he's doing it again with this migration review. Now, we're going to hear more about that tomorrow, but I still am doubtful that they're actually going to wind up getting a real handle on the numbers. Oh, no. But they do know that this is a huge problem because all of these migrants are driving inflation. They come here, they spend, they increase the pressure on the economy, but they're not sensitive to the interest rates, which is the only tool the Reserve Bank has to hit the economy and cool the economy. That hits ordinary Aussies, and that's why there's so much resentment in the community right now.
No, you're right. But listen, we're jumping ahead of ourselves. I want to go back to Dan, and the point here is that he's criticising the media, Sky in particular, and yet during the COVID years, it was only Sky that actually stood up to this character.
Hear, hear.
Peter Credlin did a superb job, and the other reporters, Sky reporters down in Melbourne. But you used to watch those endless, appalling things where Dan and that Brett, whatever his name was, character would get up with all their numbers and things. It was pure scaremongering, fearmongering of the worst sort, intimidating the public, the population, in as James said, into the worst COVID response from a government, but also the worst results of any government in the world virtually. And yet none of the media in Victoria would stand up to this character. He had them all under his thumb. All the mainstream media, the ABC, all the rest of them, only Sky stood up to this character, which is why he is so dirty on Sky and calling us BS and all the rest of it. Were it not for Sky, you would literally have a dictatorship in Melbourne during the COVID years. So, Dan, yes, you're right to be angry with Sky because they were the only media to come after you, and boy, they needed to go after you. Rita, I also want to go, we're talking about the migration and so on, but I want to talk about the detainees. Now, there's a great, people in New South Wales and Queensland will know Ray Hadley during the years of Kevin Rudd's boats coming the whole time, had a great kind of siren he would sound every time a boat landed up at Christmas Island. Well, I think we need a new sound, and that's the sound of clanging jail doors. Every time another detainee, Rita, gets arrested. We've now had 6 of them released by this Labor government. Can you believe it? Any number of nefarious things these individuals may be capable of doing and have been convicted of, and yet we now have 6 people released by the completely hopeless Albanese government, already 6 arrested within a week or so, Rita.
Well, yes, and we do know that the numbers released, some of them have committed the most heinous of offences. That's why they were in detention. We've had murders, rapes, child sexual abuse. We've now had 6 arrested on a variety of charges, from theft to
indecent assault.
Indecent assault is probably the most serious of the 6. And what James mentioned before about Peter Dutton setting policy from opposition is 100% right. It was those 6 amendments that the Albanese government accepted immediately
but
because
Rita,
they had to. They have been caught completely unprepared for this High Court
they
ruling.
were completely unprepared. And, you know, it is scandalous here that Claire O'Neill goes out there trying to attack Dutton and saying that this is somehow the Liberals' fault. They knew, and if you go back and you read the full High Court decision, they knew back as far as May that this was the likely outcome of this decision. That's why they were trying to shove this guy, NZYQ, who was guilty and found guilty of an unspeakable crime, which I don't want to talk about on a Sunday morning, frankly. And they tried to shove him off to a Five Eyes country, who, of course, didn't want them because they don't want that sort of person. Okay. They were so desperate to get rid of him because they knew this case wasn't going to go their way. And yet they didn't have any legislation ready to go. They flagged, oh, no, this is going to be fine. We're going to be fine. And they acted like it wasn't going to happen. And there was a real, I think, disconnect between Claire O'Neill's office and Home Affairs, the bureaucracy, which was managing this because they didn't know what was going on and they were caught blindsided. And the safety of the Australian community was therefore compromised and blindsided by their inability to manage this.
But, and let you disconnect is a gentle word, James. I would argue that this is the most useless, hopeless clown show of a government we have had. Even worse, I would say, than the Rudd government. Oh. And that's saying something. No, seriously, let's not forget, this is the dregs of the Rudd government who are now running the country. At least Kevin, and I'd say this, at least Kevin could work his way around an addendum or vaguely have some programmatic specificity or whatever it was going on. This lot have no idea what they are doing. We had Mark Dreyfus during the week getting angry again with Sky, simply because, again, Sky were asking the very sensible point. Will this government apologise to those people who will suffer and have suffered at the hands of people getting out of detention who should be in detention? It's a very simple question. It was a correct question to ask. And again, we had Dreyfus, useless character, screaming and carrying on and wagging his finger. Worse than I wag my finger. And that's saying something,
that's
Mark
a lot,
Dreyfus. I know.
But at least you're wagging into the camera. but can we say something on Dreyfus? Because, the little tantrum he had was unseemly. It was also unseemly that all the so-called feminists in the media who were
they went silent, did they? They went silent.
Well, not only silent, The Guardian was defending it, saying it wasn't actually a reasonable response, and thank God he was making the point that needed to be made. These are the same people who were having meltdowns of themselves because Tony Abbott looked at his watch.
Yeah.
That was misogyny, but that was fine. But worse than that is what the Attorney General allowed to happen, and this is something I think hasn't been reported on enough, is that he approved the Australian Human Rights Commission, the taxpayer-funded Australian Human Rights Commission, to advocate for the release of these detainees. They were involved in the High Court case. Now, previous Attorney Generals, both Michaelia Cash, Christian Porter, they blocked the Australian Human Rights Commission from that action, but he approved it and approved it very quickly.
And Rita, this is a point that cannot be made often enough. This whole government here, and by the way, it's interesting your point too about how this is the dregs of the Rudd government, and I would argue that Australia and the United States are both suffering from these sort of last term of the last left governments, because it's the Bidens are the last dregs of Obama, and they're these zombie governments that we're saddled with on both sides of the Pacific. But, the Albanese government has never really been serious. The left has never been serious. Progressives aren't. They are not serious, for the most part, about border security. Remember, Anthony Albanese opposed TPVs. He opposed mandatory detention when he was in opposition. It's got a long, long record, and that tone is set from the top down. They fundamentally think borders are wrong, racist, terrible, and any sort of mandatory detention they just simply do not like. So, of course, they're going to act in this way. They're not going to be managing it competently. What Dreyfus was doing was a massive bit of deflection because, of course, what Olivia Caisley, the Sky News reporter, was asking, as you said, Rowan, was, do you apologize to those who were victims? He turned it around to, do you apologize for enforcing the law? That's not what Olivia Caisley asked. And also, on the misogyny point, it's worth noting that Claire O'Neill had started to answer that question, and Dreyfus ran over the top of her to then go and have a massive crack at Olivia Caisley. So that whole thing, but the big point about that press conference, that Blue Room press conference, I have not seen that room turn against a minister or a prime minister since, the days of Morrison and Me Too. And I think there's something very interesting shifting in the wind about just how the tide is really starting to run out on this government.
Well, it's great that Christmas is coming up, because here's a Christmas game for all outsiders, viewers to do with, get the family round, Christmas lunch and so on. And the game is to work out who is the very worst member of the Albanese government.
And
there's so many to choose from. There's so many to choose from. You'll have hours of fun. But the rule is you have to cite the three I's: the ideology that they base their decision on, the idiocy that they've then come up with, and then the sheer incompetence with which they have delivered the ideology and the idiocy. That's the game. Forget the Christmas crackers. Forget all the unpacking the things. That's the game to play around the Christmas table. Find out who... Rita's already got her nomination.
The front runner, I mean, it's going to take some beating. I know we've had Claire O'Neill, we've had Giles, we had... the Attorney General and the Treasurer also hasn't exactly covered himself in glory in recent months.
Treasurer's right up there at the top.
But, I mean, who is going to beat the front runner, Chris Bowen? I mean,
you got me there.
Okay.
49 bureaucrats at COP28. No, who knows, James, what the budget for that would be? We must be talking, I don't know, hundreds of thousands. I don't know how much money. It'll be a lot of money. 49 of them there. And there's a 17-year-old teenage kid who we had on the show last week, who is the only smart one there that we've sent from Australia. The rest of them are clowns wandering around, bumping into people in the shopping malls of Dubai. What a joke. You're right, he's right at the top of the list. But Burke has snuck through. Now, he was competent. Burke snuck through this industrial relations bill, which is pure ideology. It's all ideology.
Yep.
And the idiocy is it's going to make it much harder for you, your kids, and everyone else to get a job in the future. That's what Burke has done.
Who we haven't named in that list, and that's important, is someone who's just been quietly biding their time, being competent. He has not been damaged by the Voice debacle. He was very quiet during the Voice debate. That Bill Shorten. I think
sharpening knife, man.
Waiting in the wind, waiting for his moment. Of course, Kevin Rudd has made it very difficult, but not impossible.
Well, I can tell you that there's a lot of talk around Labour circles right now, and we'll just leave it at that he is doing some mathematics around the possibility.
Would that mathematical equation include a T for Tanya in there?
No, I don't think so.
B for BS, that unfortunate initials of Bill Shorten, plus TB equals potential leadership.
The thing is, though, is that...
Or are they against each other?
I think the thing is that, with the Albanese being in the seat of Graindler, another inner city, member of the left is not gonna fly. I think. But
Tanya's more popular with the membership, and of course now you've got to have that double vote.
You do have to have a double vote.
I'm sure probably the.
Well, we'll get back to this. Lots to talk about this, and you'll be talking about it over Christmas as well, because Labour is collapsing in front of our eyes. Now, let's head to Tel Aviv, where Israeli news anchor Lital Shemesh joins us to update us on the developing situation, what's happening there in Gaza. Lital, great to see you again. Thanks so much for staying up late to chat to us on Outsiders. It's been, so the ceasefire's over. You've now got the IDF in there, moving into the southern part of Gaza. What's the mood in Israel? Is the support holding for the united kind of Israeli support for the IDF? What's happening?
Hi, Rowan. Thank you so much for having me on the show. So yes, the situation in Israel at the moment is that the IDF is moving forward within the Gaza Strip towards the southern part of the Gaza Strip. 100%, Israel is backing the IDF 100% in this operation. And now you have to understand there is no other option than to take down, to wipe out Hamas from the Gaza Strip, we need to get back safety. We need to get back security to our towns, to our cities. And I must mention that throughout this operation, throughout the recent weeks, months, 2 months of the operation war that's been going between Israel and Gaza, we're still getting rockets. So we're talking about dozens of rockets being fired from the Gaza Strip into Israel whilst our IDF soldiers are inside the Gaza Strip. So whenever the world is talking about calling for a ceasefire, I'm asking, what about calling Hamas to release the hostages? Calling Hamas to stop firing rockets towards our cities and our towns? That should be like the first thing that needs to be asked for.
Well, in my opinion, you can only have a ceasefire when every single member of Hamas is either dead or arrested and standing trial for murder and human rights abuses. Rita.
Now, Lital, you would have seen the images that have gone around the world, and they've caused all sorts of uproar of fighting-age men, Palestinians who've been stripped to their underwear, sitting in rows. The IDF images have come out. Now, explain to our viewers why they are doing that. I mean, to me, it's quite obvious why people would be stripped if there's fear of that. They may have a weapon or a suicide vest. But explain to me what's happened there and what happens afterwards, after the IDF establishes who they are.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Rita, because I've been seeing a lot of fake news and videos going on online on Instagram and Facebook, spreading all kinds of different versions of what we're seeing. So I think it's important to clarify that these people are actually terrorists who are giving themselves up to the IDF soldiers. Some of them came out with weapons. Obviously, you need to strip them down to make sure that they don't have any sort of explosive devices on them before you arrest them. And I've been getting some questions from people asking, why does the world needs to see these pictures? Because some people are just seeing, middle-aged men sitting on the floor. And I'm saying it's not important for Europe to see it. It's important for the entire Middle East to see these pictures of terrorists being surrendered, because Israel is fighting this war not just against Hamas. Israel needs these pictures to go all over the Middle East, because we're getting rockets at the moment from Hezbollah up north. We're getting rockets from the Houthis from Yemen, firing rockets towards Eilat, the southern part of Israel. So we need the world to see that we are managing to win this war, that these terrorists are surrendering. So when I'm looking at these pictures, I honestly couldn't care less about what Europe is thinking. All I'm caring about is the Middle East and Lebanon, Hezbollah, Yemen, and Iran to see Israel is winning. Israel is winning this war, and Israel will fight Hamas.
James.
And I mean, Lital, it does look like we're coming closer to some sort of end game. The reports are that Sinwar, the head of Hamas, is surrounded. We're waiting to find out what happens with that. Tunnel networks are being destroyed. What then is the next step for Israel and for Gaza? What does the end game look like once Hamas is broken? Does Israel occupy Gaza again? Does an international force come in to occupy and pacify Gaza? And how do you prevent the mistakes of the past, which have seen, after conflict, basically rewarding terrorists for their bad behavior with more aid and redevelopment?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and a big question that I'm not sure Israel has the answers at the moment. Because on one hand, Israel doesn't want to get back its control in the Gaza Strip. As you know, we've redrone, took down all of our men and women from the Gaza Strip in 2005. On the other hand, America and President Biden is pressuring Israel to let the Palestinian Authority to govern the Gaza Strip. So I ask you, why on earth would Israel wipe out Hamas, take down one terror organization, and just give the Gaza Strip to the hands of the Palestinian Authority, whilst the Palestinian Authority is actually still paying money for terrorists? Actually, the Hamas terrorists who committed the massacre on October 7th are getting salaries from the Palestinian Authority. So you cannot fight one terror entity and just give Hamas in the hands of another one. And I think the world should understand that the Palestinian Authority is no better than Hamas terrorists, who are number one priority is to wipe out Israel off the map. The charter of the Palestinian Authority says the same thing as the charter of Hamas. Israel, the Jewish state, cannot exist. One charter is religious, the other charter is secular, but it says the same thing. So I think we need to find some sort of a solution, maybe an international power forces that will control the Gaza Strip. But I think just giving it up to the Palestinian Authority would be a big mistake. And I think it's really important to emphasize that Israel is fighting this war not just for the Jewish people, but for the entire West. Because Hamas is not the only terror organization, fundamentalistic extremist terror organization fighting the West. We had the Taliban, we had ISIS, we had Boko Haram, we had the Muslim Brotherhood, and the list can go on and on and on. They're not just fighting Israel, they're fighting Western values, they're fighting the West, and whoever will just ignore what is happening in Israel, it will come knocking on their back door. So I think the entire world should wake up. This is a wake-up call.
And Lital, I'll just quickly play you a clip of a so-called well-educated girl in Palestine or in the West Bank or Gaza. I'm not sure where she is, but she is basically answering the question of what from the river to the sea means to a supposedly educated Palestinian woman. Have a listen.
I think free Palestine means the destruction of Israel, because Israel was built on Palestinian lands.
So what happens to Israel? Okay, go ahead.
In order for Palestine to be free, we have to. Israel has to go away.
So, Lital, Israel just has to magically go away. This is genocide this woman is advocating, in effect, and this is what all those students around the world, Australia included, horrible scenes, and I apologise on Australia's behalf of the scenes that happened on the Opera House and so on. But, Lital, from the river to the sea means wiping out every Jew and destroying Israel. Why do so-called educated people accept this or not understand that it is genocide?
Yeah, it's very sad to see what is happening on universities, especially in America. You've probably been showing the recent hearings for the different presidents of different universities. Actually, just 10 minutes ago, the president of Pennsylvania University has resigned after she said whatever she said about, it depends on the context, What if someone would have, what if someone would talk like that genocide is okay for Black people, that genocide is okay for LGBT community? No one would have agreed. But when the Jews are in the pictures, everything is just on the table. Everything is, they're allowing everything. They're allowing those chants. They're allowing people to actually call on campus, Palestine would be free from the river to the sea. And you see for yourself, they hardly understand what they're chanting. They hardly understand what is going on. You just need to understand that there's a lot of money involved, a lot of Arab money involved in these projects, Hamas money, Qatar money, and the universities should just wake up and understand what they're calling, what they are allowing on their surface. You see a lot of donors starting to take out their monies from the university, and I think that's the best way to really fight what is going on campuses, because this is our next generation.
Lital Shemesh, always great to chat to you. Great insights there. Thank you so much for coming on Outsiders this morning. Stay safe there in Israel, and we'll speak to you again. And happy Hanukkah, by the way. After the break, we'll speak to Chris Merritt about the escalating detainee crisis for the Albo government. Plus, of course, Rita's reality check. We all need a reality check, and Rita's the person to give it to us. Don't go away.
You're watching Outsiders with your hosts, Rowan, Yuletide, Dean and James, Candy Canes, Morrow. And I'm Rita Panahi. Coming up shortly, we'll be speaking to legal expert Chris Merritt about the indefinite detention debacle with a 6th immigration detainee now arrested, and He'll tell us more about the Albanese government's multi-million dollar payout to Brittany Higgins. But first, let's check in with the leader of the free world, President Joe Biden, who has had a rough week with his crack addict, whore enthusiast son Hunter facing multiple indictments, but not for all the offences he should be charged with. The Biden administration's ongoing border crisis has intensified, with new monthly records being set, millions crossing into the US illegally every single year. This week, another record smash with over 12,000 migrant encounters at the southern border on Tuesday. Yes, that's 12,000 in a single day. And that's just the ones that were encountered crossing illegally. But the president wasn't talking about the illegal immigration crisis yesterday or his degenerate son. He was in Nevada pledging billions for a high-speed train line, or as the president put it, how much?
Over $1,300,300,000,000,000 $300 million.
What was that, Joe? What was that?
Over $1,300,000,000,300,000,000.
What's most worrying is that he was reading that from an auto cue, and we still got over $1,300,000,000,000,000. Yes, but pledging $3 billion for trains presented Biden with a perfect opportunity to again repeat one of his favourite verifiable lies. This one about an Amtrak conductor he knows congratulating him for travelling more than 1 million miles.
How many miles do you use an aircraft for the United States Air Force as vice president? I just read in the paper, Joe, you traveled 1,200,000 miles in Air Force. He said, big, I won't quote him exactly. He said, big deal, Joey. He said, we just had a retirement dinner in Newark, New Jersey. He said, just had a retirement dinner. You know how many miles you've ridden? I said, no, Angie. He said, 1,327 miles. I don't hear any more about the Air Force.
Why does he keep doing this? It's one thing to lie about making money from your son's dodgy business dealings that essentially amounted to a pay-for-access scheme. But why does the president lie about things that have been debunked, even by the friendliest pro-Democrat media, and about issues of little consequence? Is he such a pathological liar that he can't help himself? If Joe's lips are moving, it's almost guaranteed that lies are spilling out. Because even CNN, the Democrats' unofficial propaganda arm, has called out the president over this oft-repeated lie. This fact check is from mid-2021. For the record, the dude he refers to retired from Amtrak in 1993. None of that story ever happened. But it wasn't just tall tales about Amtrak conductors in his latest speech. The president also opined about law and order. Oh, this is...
All these mass murders, not this weekend, but have been because people have picked up kids and grabbed stuff off of counters, off of the... Anyway, I don't want to get angry.
Oh dear. And he also told us he likes to go skeet shooting.
Look, I own a couple shotguns. I haven't shot them in a while because I usually just make target practice, skeet shooting.
So you haven't shot your guns for years. So what are you skeet shooting with, Joe? There are so many questions here. It's very perplexing. But like Australia, the biggest issue facing everyday Americans is the cost of living. And oh boy, the president had some good news to deliver on that front.
All told, we've created 14 million jobs since he took office, more than any president's created in all 4 years of a term. Wages are up more than inflation.
Oh, he stuck to the auto cue there wisely, but the auto cue was also full of lies. Sure, there's been millions of jobs added, but most of those jobs aren't new. They're simply workers returning to the jobs they were forced to leave due to the pandemic response. Taking credit for that is a bit rich. And as for his claim there that wage growth is higher than inflation, pure malarkey. The Consumer Price Index shows that prices have soared by more than 17% since President Joe Biden took office. Or as Joe would put it...
Over $1,300,000,000,000,300,000,000,000.
Now for my final reality check of 2023. I want to deliver this message to young women everywhere in the hopes that they open their eyes and realise just how little the modern feminist movement cares about them. We've seen it time and time again from modern feminists siding with trans activists over females fighting to protect sex-based rights and spaces, to their total abandonment of women living under Islam. It's sadly undeniable that instead of focusing on what is in the best interests of women, modern feminism has become a political movement that merely uses women to push a hard left agenda. Issues of great importance are ignored if politically inconvenient, while trivial issues are inflated and inflamed. We saw that in Australia when feminists even criticised ex-PM Tony Abbott's paid parental leave proposal. I mean, that was undoubtedly good for women, especially professional women wanting to start families. But then we saw those same feminists hyperventilating with rage over Tony Abbott's supposed misogyny because he looked at his watch and there was that time that he winked during a radio interview. But I've got to say, even I, who has long called out the hypocrisy and intellectual dishonesty of these pretenders, even I've been shocked by the callousness with which so many feminists and their beta male allies are treating the events of October 7, namely the mass rape, torture and slaughter of Israeli women. And we'll have more on that in the next hour with some examples of high-profile feminists ignoring the plight of these brutalised women. The same feminists who see rape culture everywhere ignore it where it actually exists, just like they ignored the rape culture behind the Rotherham child sex abuse scandal. They ignore mass suffering because in their warped worldview, the perpetrators are the oppressed and the victims are the oppressors. That's their neo-Marxist ideology, and sadly it trumps any concern they have for women.
Thanks, Rita. And the nominations for the worst member of the Albanese government are already flooding in. David Adler from the Australian Jewish Association is nominating Penny Wong on the grounds that she was bad enough to begin with, but bringing in 860 Gazan refugees. Rita, what could possibly go wrong with that? Good call, David, but there's lots more discussions to be had, including, of course, we're going to talk about Mark Dreyfus. Well, the Detainee debacle is proving to be a big headache for the Albanese government, with calls for tougher security measures following the High Court ruling. It comes as a sixth detainee, as we said earlier, was arrested this weekend. Joining us is our legal contributor to The Australia and Vice President of the Rule of Law Institute, Chris Merritt. Chris, great to see you, as always, here on Outsider. So I won't ask you now for your nomination for the worst member, but I imagine that Dreyfus might be lurking up there. But tell us about this detainee business. We've now got 6 of them have been arrested only a week after they've been let out. Yeah. What happened?
Well, it's pretty clear it's been mishandled, but there's 2 dates to remember, and they're very important. November 8 was when the original order from the High Court was issued. It related to one person. November 28, when the reasons came down, which made it clear that this underlying principle would apply to others. Now, between those 2 dates, the government decided to release 147 people. Now, the reason they would have done that, it had to be speculation and guesswork because they didn't have the reasons. They didn't have the fundamental principle that spread this ruling beyond one person, known as NZYQ, to others, 147 others. They were speculating about it. On November 28, when the ruling came down, no doubt about it, they had a solid legal basis for making those people, setting those people free, but not before then. So there was this 3-week period of legal uncertainty where there was no obligation at law to release these people, and that's when they were set free.
And go back to another date, Chris, as well. Why did Claire O'Neill why weren't they prepared? Because what was it that originally set all this off? Because hadn't Peter Dutton always said, no, why did this happen under Labor? Explain that.
Look, Claire O'Neill's failure to have legislation ready is inexplicable, completely inexplicable. This case was argued out quite clearly. If you go through the submissions, you can see what the argument was. She should have, anybody, any Attorney General, any minister responsible for Home Affairs should have had a fallback system in place. It was clear that this precedent that had been in place for 20 years was under challenge. And it's astounding that it was not made aware, that the minister was not made aware. Now, I'm not sure whether she received advice on this effect, but the logic of it was completely consistent with a series of other High Court decisions, terror-related matters, where Ben Breaker, the convicted terrorist, had his citizenship restored broadly on the same principle. The court is insisting that it, not the executive or the parliament, is responsible for imposing punishments. Now, stripping people of citizenship, that's a punishment. Confining them indefinitely on immigration detention, that's a punishment. That's why these things were struck down, not because of some matter of principle, really. It's the way in which these punishments were imposed.
James?
Well, so that's where I want to ask you, Chris, where does this go next? Because, as you say, these decisions were running in a certain direction. The NZYQ case, they don't jump through a lot of sort of convoluted hoops to get to this position. It's a fairly straightforward argument they're making about, you can't indefinitely detain somebody without them having committed a crime and they serve their sentence. Where does this then take Australia? Because it seems to me that if on the one hand you've got a refugee convention which requires you to let people in, and on the other hand you've got a court that says you can't indefinitely detain them, does this put the rest of the detention regime under threat for others? And also, does it mean that we will eventually not be able to have offshore solutions, other sorts of solutions to crises that come down the pike, down the track?
Look, I think the problem, you're right, but I think the problem starts at the border. Once people are in the jurisdiction...
This is what I mean, yeah.
In Australia, all these rights and obligations are triggered. It's a problem for border control, quite frankly. Once you're inside Australia, this is how the system works.
So is there a question then, sorry, just to follow up with that, is there a problem then with being part of the refugee convention? Is there going to have to be some rethinking by Western countries about that convention that says once people are here, and it's Europe, it's the United States, a whole series of rights accrue to you?
Look, I think yes, but I think also we need to focus on what is a refugee. Is a refugee someone who goes from country to country until they get to the one country they really want to get to?
With the biggest welfare system,
Or is it someone who leaves an area where they're being persecuted and goes to the next safest place?
Which was always the definition. Rita?
Well, and also we've signed up to the convention of where we can't have anyone who's stateless. So you have the other countries rejecting them, and then we are saddled with somebody else's problem. But I'm also interested in the Australian Human Rights Commission's involvement in this. I don't think enough has been said about that. This is a taxpayer-funded body who seems to continuously advocate for positions that aren't in the interests of Australian taxpayers or Australians in general. Tell me about their advocacy in this case and in other High Court.
Well, for starters, I think the opposition is right. They shouldn't have been permitted to make submissions. We've got the government making submissions, and here's a government agency making other submissions.
At war with the government. So the government's the defendant and the Human Rights Commission is standing with the applicant.
I mean, it confuses the position as far as the judges
Idiocy,
are concerned.
Incompetence. Yep, we got it again. Let's talk briefly about the Brittany Higgins compensation saga that's been going on. Give us your legal point of view. How did we get to this? Is this another... we've got $2-point-something million paid to Brittany Higgins. Yet two of the ministers, Linda Reynolds and Michaela Cash, she can carry on and sue them. It all seems very complicated and unusual from a legal point of view.
Reprehensible, I think, is a better term. I think what's come to light, thankfully, because of Justice Lee's ruling making available the deed of settlement between the government and Ms Higgins, what's come to light is it's just a skewed settlement. it immunised the Commonwealth from future claims. It specifically carved out future claims against Michaelia Cash and Linda Reynolds. Linda Reynolds and Michaelia Cash were subjected to financial coercion by the government to exclude them from the mediation, which meant they were unable, they were the only people, they were her employers, Miss Higgins' former employers, they were able to test her assertions. So the only people who were able to, on behalf of the Commonwealth, of taxpayers we're talking about, put up a contrary case, they were specifically excluded and threatened, if you want to take place, fine, but you're going to have to pay your own legal costs. The Commonwealth won't meet them.
Well, that aspect of the financial coercion to me seems to be indefensible from the Albanese government's point of view, because obviously if you want to get to the bottom of what precisely happened and if compensation should be paid and how much, you need to have the points of view of the people who were involved. So is this going to be, we've talked about federal ICAC, IBAC, is this going to end up there, and has the Albanese government got a couple of things to worry about?
Look, on its face, I can't see how this settlement complies with the Legal Services Directions, which are the rules governing financial settlements by the Commonwealth. There's got to be a realistic prospect of liability being found against the Commonwealth. If you're going to go ahead and make a settlement beyond $100,000, there needs to be a legal opinion by the Australian government solicitor or an independent lawyer saying that normal law and practice has been complied with. Now, it hasn't.
Yeah.
We know that. This claim was untested. The only documents it was based on were documents prepared by Miss Higgins and her lawyers. The other side of the argument was not heard. So I can't see how that requirement in the rules is met. But there's a fallback. If the Attorney-General considers that this is a special circumstance, he can certify that the normal rules should not apply. That's how the rules work. So there's two things we need to look for, or hopefully the Anti-Corruption Commission is looking for, and that's either, was there a lawyer's opinion saying the normal rules have been complied with? If there's not, did the Attorney-General say the normal rules should not apply in this circumstance, and Miss Higgins is entitled to $2.45 million?
Chris Merritt, you said it on this show months and months ago that you could foresee this entire compensation package winding up with, as Rita says, a National Corruption Commission looking into it. You were the first person to say it. We shall see whether it happens. Thanks so much, Chris Merritt, for being with us today here on Outsiders. After the break, Academia, Lefty, Lunacy. Lots coming up here on Outsiders. You're watching Outsiders with Rita, Paleface Panahi, James, Anglo-American Morrow, and myself, Rowan, blonde-haired and blue-eyed Dean. And thank you so much for watching this bastion of white privilege every Sunday morning and making us the most disconnected from humanity show on television. Disconnected from humanity? What? Allow me to explain, or rather, allow Netflix's wunderkind, film director Ibram X. Kendi, to explain.
I don't think white people worldwide have really reckoned with how much their own personal identity is shaped by constructions of whiteness, and how much that construction of whiteness prevents white people from connecting to humanity.
Right, so whiteness means you two can't connect to humanity?
It's been said before, but apparently not, folks.
Take it away.
In other words, recognizing that when you recognize that you are part and parcel of humanity, in other words, you're not over humanity, right? It allows you to really be able to connect to people who don't look like you, who have kinky hair, who have dark skin, and to see yourself in them. And it's whiteness that prevents that.
On that racially tolerant, so tolerant and non-prejudiced note, let's grab some more lefty lunacy. Rita, your special guest Douglas Murray was not impressed with Ibrahim either.
I did ask him on Friday about his thoughts about Kendi because he's hugely influential, Kendi, not just in academia but the corporate world. Former CEO boss gave him $10 million to spread that kind of bile, and Douglas set out a challenge for the gentleman.
I challenge Ibrahim X. Kendi to a debate anytime, anywhere, any place. I'm very happy to debate a motion of his choosing. I'm very happy for all the proceeds to go to a charity of our choice. And I'd like to see him show up once. But he has never had his facile ideas debated. And so I suggest there's a reason for that. He knows they don't stand up to scrutiny. Fine. Once again, he can reveal that fact to the public.
Great stuff.
Yes. I would love to see that debate.
That would be a great debate, but the Douglas part of it would be really interesting. The Kendi bit would be a bit slow, James.
A few dramatic pauses, as they say. Yes, anyway.
Anyway, whiteness disconnects you from humanity. Thank you. That's the modern tolerant left at work again. Californian toy laws, a new Californian law, James.
Yeah, look, California, you know, they've solved every other problem in the world. They don't have any crime, any homelessness, any poverty, any dysfunction. They don't have millions of people fleeing the state every year trying to get away. So instead what they're doing is a new law that says that children's toy stores have to have a gender-neutral section so that there's boys' toys, girl toys, and gender-neutral toys. Now,
what?
I don't even know how they begin to define this, but I guess Rita kind of comes down to this sort of, you know, real sort of sexist assumption on the part of the left that only boys want to play with trucks and only girls want to play with dolls. I mean, really, what?
And I can see all sorts of future outrages where things that are in the boys section should really be in the gender neutral section, and you know, and they're going to fine businesses if they don't comply. This is the thing. This isn't just a helpful suggestion. There is mandatory observance.
It always starts off as, oh yeah, it's all this, and then bang.
But here's the question. Here's the question: Will the shoplifters have to shoplift equally from the boys, girls, and gender-neutral section?
Very good, very good. After the break, the hypocrisy of the Me Too movement. Plus, we'll talk to Keith Pitt, as we should, in a team. You're watching Outsiders with Rita Panahi, with James Morrow and myself, Rowan Dean. Now, we need to talk about lovies. What is a lovey exactly? My friend Graham Richardson used to say to me. I've never met one. Well, Graham, here is just one example of a lovey. In fact, I would say an ultra-lovey. Meet Fatima Goss Graves, proud feminist and president of the National Women's Law Center in the USA. As it happens, she is also the founder of the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund, which was part of the Me Too movement. You know, Time's Up for the patriarchy, that sort of thing. Looking out for the interests of women. And Fatima is also an advisor on the American Law Institute project on sexual and gender-based misconduct on campus. Wow. Let me remind you, you can't have too many strings to your progressive bow if you're a lovey. Fatima is also, interestingly, married to Matthew Graves. Who's he? Well, Matthew Graves was appointed by President Joe Biden as the US Attorney for the District of Columbia, and he is responsible for prosecuting all those hapless individuals involved in the January 6th insurrection, where people were caught on CCTV wandering aimlessly around the corridors of the Capitol building. Including this bloke, you remember old Chewbacca, the terrifying Quanon shaman. Matthew Graves has so far prosecuted over 1,000 individuals from that day. But I digress. Brushing up their lovey credentials, Matthew and Fatima Graves were recently described in a puff piece as the activist couple who lead the war on MAGA Republicans. Okay, the Graveses seem particularly close to Vice President Kamala Harris, The article says it also reveals that Fatima's National Women's Law Centre is a beneficiary of some of the wealthiest foundations in the world, including generous donations from good old George Soros. In 2021, its assets skyrocketed to over $100 million. Oh, and coincidentally, 2021 was the year that Joe Biden took office and Matthew was confirmed as arguably the country's most powerful US attorney. Happy days. Fatima and her National Women's Law Centre were very active in condemning the Conservative Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh. You remember that? Accusing him of sexual assault, following unfounded allegations made by Christine Blasey Ford. Believe all women. That was the mantra. But, weirdly, Fatima and her outfit then defended presidential candidate Joe Biden from similar allegations made against him by Tara Reid. Suddenly it was, don't believe all women. It can be so confusing being a virtue-signalling, woman-believing feminist these days. As a lovey, it's important to be able to make these subtle distinctions, important distinctions, you see. Anyway, Fatima popped up again this week, defending the rights of transgender women, i.e. blokes, biological males, to participate in schoolgirls' sports. Indeed, she even seemed to be suggesting that biological girls should simply learn to lose gracefully.
Success in school sports depends on a whole range of factors, including how hard you work and coaching and access to really good resources and facilities. And trans students participate in sports for the same reason as their kids, because it is fun, because it creates belonging and community, because it teaches so much about persistence and leadership and discipline, unless they learn to lose gracefully, hopefully. And often they learn to win with dignity, hopefully. They learn to do the sort of work that means you have higher grades and stay connected to school. I want every kid to have that chance.
Now, as a performance, a theatrical performance of supreme loviness, that one is pretty hard to beat. The beatific smile, the glowing air of worthiness, and the almost kumbaya quality of peace and love to all girls and trans girls, and the eternal plea, the lovies lament, why can't we all just get on together? Trouble is, life doesn't quite work that way. Here at the same hearings was Riley Gaines, a young schoolgirl swimmer who dared to take on the transgender community when transgender Leah Thomas, a biological male in every sense of the word, started dominating the pool, basically putting an end to Riley's hopes and dreams.
Women are terrified to speak out. They're terrified to be vilified. They're terrified to be called transphobic or bigots like we've been called in this hearing today for stating our views. And that's a real threat. And I understand it, because since taking the stance that I've taken, my address has been leaked. And since my address was leaked, I've had people showing up at my doorstep. I've had drones flying above my house. I can't even tell you the amount of death threats that I've had that have rendered the FBI getting involved. It's real. The vitriol I've faced, I've been held for ransom for over 4 hours, where these protesters demanded that if I wanted to make it home to see my family safely again, I had to pay them money. I've been hit, I've been spit on, I've had bottles thrown at me, drinks poured on me. Thomas's teammates in particular, they were forced every single week to go to mandatory LGBTQ education meetings to learn about how just by being cisgender, they were oppressing Thomas. And when they were concerned about the locker room aspect, and 16 of these swimmers, Thomas's teammates, sent an email to their administration with their parents on the email expressing their discomfort in the locker room, the administration responded back with, if you feel uncomfortable seeing male genitalia, here are some counseling resources that you should seek in an attempt to re-educate yourself.
Re-education. You see, it's all kumbaya and smiles and compassion as long as you're on the left side of the political aisle. But the moment you break with left-wing orthodoxy and dogma, The savagery from the militant left is relentless, and shamefully, it is excused by the mainstream left. And it's not just on transgenderism that women's genuine rights are trashed by the left. Believe all women died in a ditch in the Negev desert when it applied to Jewish women being hunted down, raped, tortured and murdered by Hamas terrorists and civilian men from Gaza. What we've seen since, and I've spoken about this repeatedly over the last few weeks, can be summed up in this grotesque moral equivalence argument put by a Democrat US Congresswoman, Pramila Jayapal, repeatedly refusing to unequivocally condemn Hamas.
Terrorist organizations like Hamas obviously are using these as tools. However, I think we have to be balanced about bringing in the outrages against Palestinians.
Yeah. Balanced, however, there you have it, the moral equivalence of the left. Well, here's another woman, a Jewish mum, bravely speaking out to a group of, wait for it, social workers.
To characterize the events of October 7th as a counteroffensive where my people were killed and maimed, and yes, raped, whether you like it or not, whether it fits your narrative. To characterize that as anything else but terrorism and a massacre is unacceptable from people who are studying to be social workers.
Social workers wearing Palestinian keffirs and masks and who knows what else. Now, I searched high and low to find out whether Fatima Goss Graves or any of her $100 million Justice for Women, Believe All Women feminist organisations have spoken out condemning the atrocities against the Jewish women and girls of October 7th. I could not find one single comment, not one word. Plenty on why they support transgender women, i.e. blokes, in sport, nothing about the women and girls butchered by Hamas. I did, however, have no trouble finding these appalling comments by Australian feminist Clementine Ford, who put up a post on Instagram directed at, quote, Zionist women, stating, quote, I don't care that you felt betrayed or let down, and I especially don't care that you want to have a big crybaby rant. Feminist Ford then went on to say, quote, you're the enthusiastic supporters of a murderous regime that has been killing children for over 70 years. Sounds like a blood libel to me. And concluded with, quote, you're pathetic, you disgust me, and I pity you for being so basic and gross. And then this bizarre comment from Clementine Ford. Honestly, you actually can't get any whiter than that. This is the modern left, folks. We've educated them here in Australia. Now, here's Asita Kanko, who, Clementine, doesn't look all that white to me, but what would I know? Asita is a Belgian politician of the right-leaning New Flemish Alliance.
A pressing question for some Western feminists. How can you remain silent when women and girls are raped, tortured, their bodies carried around naked and spat on by bearded men shouting Allah Akbar? Then you can never call yourself a feminist again. Every day, including today, some Western hypocritical feminists should be ashamed of their silence on the horror that Hamas men inflicted to women and girls on 7 October. And that includes big names we were once proud of. Why are their lips sealed and their hearts of stone when it comes to the excruciating pain of Jewish women? The Me Too movement and so-called intersectional feminists do not care about all women. If they remain silent, it means they have lied to us about their commitment to women's rights. Their actions support the oppressor, not the victims.
Yes, the big names. Speaking of women's organisations and celebrations of women, this landed in my inbox this week. 10th of March, all about women at the Sydney Opera House, no less. A festival to answer, quote, the burning questions about gender, justice and equality. Well, I looked hard, but I trust there will also be a session dedicated to answering the burning question of why Jewish women and girls who were brutally murdered by Hamas don't seem to count to modern feminists. I'd be happy to lead a panel discussion of our leading feminists on the issue. After all, those Jewish women's defilement and deaths were celebrated only hours after they died on the steps of the Sydney Opera House itself by pro-Palestinian demonstrators. I think it's the very, very, very least the Sydney Opera House could do. A minute's silence before every single session for those murdered and kidnapped Jewish women at their 10th March event. Oh, and I do trust that unlike previous years, Clementine Ford will not be in attendance. Mercifully, some on the left have finally started to notice how disgracefully silent women's groups have been all around the world. The big names, as the Belgian MEP said. Here's Democrat Senator Kirsten Gillibrand speaking up and shaming the United Nations.
I want to thank Sheila and for the National Council of Jewish Women for standing so firm, for refusing to be silenced in this moment, and to bring the world community to bear. When I saw the list of women's rights organizations who have said nothing, I nearly choked. Where is the solidarity for women in this country and in this world to stand up for our mothers, our sisters, and our daughters?
And as Senator Gillibrand pointed out, and if you're squeamish, I apologise, what she talks about, well, it's distressing.
The horrific acts committed on October 7th by Hamas are truly indescribable. I've seen much of the raw footage. It takes your breath away in the sheer level of evil it depicts. Witnessing people trying to behead people through many means is disgusting. Hearing the testimony about what has happened to women, the types of dismemberment, the types of sexual violence to degrade them, to bring fear in their final moments, to bring fear in the eyes of those who had to witness the atrocities, is unspeakable.
There is much, much more. She spoke for about 8 minutes. It is beyond horrific, beyond evil, and I repeat what I have said. Anyone who mouths pro-Palestinian platitudes or attends protests or makes excuses without utterly and totally condemning those disgusting events of October 7th is themselves culpable and, in my opinion, beyond despicable.
This explains why the atrocities committed on October 7th and the international community's reluctance, even refusal to condemn or even acknowledge them, doesn't just strike fear in the hearts of Israeli women, it strikes fear in the hearts of every woman and girl around the globe. Their bodies are not worth defending. Their humanity is not worth protecting. The world community must do more. It must demand accountability for these intolerable crimes. The United Nations must denounce Hamas as a terrorist organization that uses rape as a weapon of war. The United Nations must live up to its purpose of upholding the principles of international law, and the United Nations must condemn these evil crimes against humanity.
The horrors of October 7th have, among many, many other things, exposed the hypocrisy, shallowness of the progressive left, of the institutions that's supposed to care for us all and for women, of the charities, the NGOs, of the lovies. their moral equivalence, their emptiness, the way they choose sides, the obscene way they prioritise victimhood, and their ability to tolerate unmitigated evil if it is at odds with their enlightened agenda of compassion and diversity and Shame on the modern left, shame on modern feminism, more importantly, shame on the lovies, hypocrites and fools who should hang their heads. Joining us now is Nationals MP, great friend of the show, Keith Pitt. Keith, it's great to see you. We saw some footage this morning and I thought you'd been out camping on the banks of the river in Brisbane there. But it turns out to be something completely different. Let's have a look at the footage. This, yes, is Brisbane. This is homelessness in Brisbane. Let's quickly have a look at the footage. Here we go. So here you can see it. This is down on the Brisbane River. What has happened, Keith? I want to get your opinion. Why is homelessness apparently out of control in Brisbane, of all places, under the enlightened leadership of Palaszczuk and her government? Keith.
Well, it's not just in Brisbane. It's in regional centres and towns like mine in Bundaberg and Hervey Bay. And this is a direct result of the policy settings of state Labor governments and the federal Labor government. You've got 500,000 extra people looking for somewhere to live. Interest rates and hence mortgage repayments are up. We've seen reports, finally, that there's been a massive increase in the tax take. And I think one of the things I want people to understand is a lot of the people living in these circumstances are employed. They're not sitting around on social services. They've actually got jobs, but they can't earn enough money to pay their rent. That's assuming they can find somewhere to live. Hervey Bay alone, I was talking to one of the frontline service providers last week. We got numbers there down to about 20 living along the beachfront. It's a nice place to live. It's a great spot. Not to be homeless, but it's a good place to live. It's now over 100. People simply can't afford to live, they can't pay their rent, they can't pay their power bill. Who'd have thought in this country your electricity bill might be what tips you over the edge into homelessness?
James.
Well, and on that electricity bill, we've seen amazing things come out of COP28 in Dubai over the past week around more than, I think, 28 nations saying that they're going to triple their nuclear power, and yet we are here on the sidelines. We spoke a bit about this last week when the story broke during our show. What is your reaction to this notion how Chris Bowen is just sticking his fingers in his ear and letting Australia be left behind while our power bills continue to skyrocket?
Well, Chris Bowen's always been a bit of an outlier, and now he's an outlier around the world. Everyone's using nuclear energy because it works. It works as baseload. It works all the time that you want it. You don't have to worry about whether it's sunny or windy or anything else. You don't need to buy batteries that are 300 times more expensive than anything else. And guess what? We've got lots of uranium. Even the Resources and Energy Quarterly have said that exports for uranium will probably go through $1 billion. But you've got states that ban it right across the country. We've got a big provider at Olympic Dam in South Australia. And why shouldn't we maximise the benefit of the resources that we've been blessed with? We should utilise this technology. It's the reason the coalition continues to push forward. But Labor and Bowen, they just can't manage it internally. So who'd have thought? We can have nuclear submarines, but can't put it on a block of concrete.
Keith, we're going to hear an announcement tomorrow from the Albanese government. They're going to cut migration to pre-pandemic levels. Again, seems to be Peter Dutton from opposition is setting Labor's policy. Tell me about what we can expect here, why they're doing that, because right now we are having record numbers coming in and it's hard to see how we're going to house them, never mind all the other stresses that are put on infrastructure.
Well, if you've got the population of the ACT arriving every year, that puts enormous stress on infrastructure. And we've heard a little bit and we've seen a drop into the media today, but I always worry about the details because Labor's pretty sneaky and we know that they oppose these types of policies. So I'll be very interested to see exactly what they do, whether there's a cap or not. It is the right decision, and yes, we've been pushing them hard, Rita, as you know, because the people I represent, they can't find a rental property. They certainly can't afford to buy one in a lot of instances. And then we have all of these challenges with inflation. So, I mean, the media reports that Peter's running the country from opposition, I think, are pretty accurate. If only they would have listened to him on detainees.
Well, tell us about the detainees.
Well, we've seen now that there are 6 who have allegedly reoffended again. We warned the government what would happen. I actually think that Claire O'Neill and Minister Giles thought that they'd get a round of applause for releasing these people because it lines up with their own ideals.
Ideology.
That is not the case. That's it. It's not the case. We've got to be incredibly careful. They should never have been released. And we've gone from having them say, no, there's nothing we can do, the court's directed us, to, oh, maybe there's something we can do, and then finally, oh, actually, we can almost do what the opposition told us to do in the first place. And yet we now have families who find themselves in a position, and yes, it's still alleged offences, but that should never have happened to them, ever. So Labor's ideology is what drives them. They don't make decisions based on reality, and unfortunately in this world, it's a tough world, and you've got to make tough decisions to protect the nation.
Everything's driven by ideology, which compounded by idiocy and incompetence. Over Christmas, Keith, you have to come up with the challenge, the very worst of Labor's ministers. Maybe you could give us a clue as to where your thinking sits at the moment.
I think it's probably a three-way go. Chris Bowen, it'll be Minister O'Neill and Minister Giles right now, and I think there's not a nose in it. It's a three-way dead heat.
James.
not Dreyfus there, but... Sorry, just on continuing though on that, where will the coalition go in terms of policies around border protection when it comes to what is your solution for fixing this in terms of the legislation that they still really haven't quite fixed it? If you look at the High Court decision, there's a very big hole that they still haven't plugged here.
Well, the first point I'll make is that we've got form. We've demonstrated what we can do. It was us that stopped the boats when everyone said it couldn't happen. It was us that basically emptied detention centres, and of children, mind you, that have been locked up under Labor's policies previously. We will get it right because we've got experienced people who've managed these places and these areas and these policies for literally years. You've got people like Peter Dutton and Alex Hawke and others who have extensive experience. We'll work with the legal system, as you would expect, within those frameworks. But right now, we have to protect the Australian people from those individuals who should not be in the public. They shouldn't be in those arenas. And we've seen allegations already of what these individuals have done. Why wouldn't you lock up criminals in this country, and in particular the ones that should not be here in the first place? So we can always find a way, and that has always been proven by us in government. People know what we can do, and we'll do it again.
Keith Pitt, Nationals MP there for Queensland. Great to have you on the show as always, Keith. Have a great Christmas if we don't see you beforehand. Thanks, mate. After the break, John Ruddick will be talking to us from Buenos Aires, where he is attending Javier Milei's inauguration. Can't wait. Plus, James's donkey vote in a tick.
Hello, you're watching Outsiders with Rowan Dean and Rita Panahi. And in a moment, we're going to be joined live from Argentina by local freedom fighter John Ruddick, who has traveled to Argentina to witness the swearing in of President Javier Milei. You're not going to want to miss that. But, and I also am pretty sure he didn't offset his carbon emissions on the trip over. But before we get to that, huge news out of the United States and the woke world of wackademia universities, where the backlash against woke anti-Semitic college administrators who have allowed, let's call them what they are, gangs of pro-Hamas students to roam their campuses, intimidating their classmates and professors like they're a bunch of 1930s Berlin brown shirts, has finally begun. First, I want you to look at these three clowns, respected academics and university presidents from MIT, the University of Pennsylvania, and Harvard University, testifying on Capitol Hill this Thursday. And remember, these are the heads of universities that actively police pronouns and microaggressions and will absolutely ruin anybody who dares to say something heretical like, men can't have babies.
At MIT, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate MIT's code of conduct or rules regarding bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
If targeted at individuals, not making public statements.
Ms. McGill, at Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
I am asking, specifically calling for the genocide of Jews, does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision.
And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
Well, guess what? As I have always said, and as we always say on this program, go woke, go broke. This depraved inability to condemn calls for genocide is already having massive consequences. I mean, after the news of the hearings went around the globe, donors started closing their checkbooks. UPenn, whose president was the second you saw there in that grab, just lost a $100 million commitment from a hedge fund billionaire who was prepared to stump up for a new Center for Innovation in Finance. Meanwhile, at Harvard, longtime donors are slashing their annual contribution to just $1 in protest. And the very beleaguered Ivy League is now offering mega donor status, which allows special treatment for a donor's kid come admissions time, slashing that down to just $2 million, cutting the price of admission, so to speak, by 90% from its previous threshold of $20 million. Now, the head of the University of Pennsylvania, well, she's in a bit of trouble here. After that testimony, she issued this groveling apology, though it clearly wasn't enough for that donor or, as we'll see, for the administration of that school.
There was a moment during yesterday's congressional hearing on anti-Semitism when I was asked if a call for the genocide of Jewish people on our campus would violate our policies. In that moment, I was focused on our university's longstanding policies aligned with the U.S. Constitution, which say that speech alone is not punishable. I was not focused on, but I should have been, the irrefutable fact that a call for genocide of Jewish people is a call for some of the most terrible violence human beings can perpetrate.
Well, guess what? The Board of Trustees saw through that little hostage video, and now she is gone, resigning just an hour ago before this show went to air. Meanwhile, at Harvard, President Claudine Gay, who told Congress that calls for genocide depended on the context, has now apologized for not properly conveying what she called, quote, my truth, unquote, not my struggle, my truth, when she spoke to Congress. Her testimony has sparked a million memes like this copy of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, put out by Harvard University Press. Now, all of this idiocy on the part of these presidents of prestigious universities is starting to raise massive questions about the qualifications of the leaders that these people are putting in charge of these schools. Harvard's President Claudine Gay, for example, well, it turns out that this distinguished academic leader has only published 11 peer-reviewed papers in her entire academic career and not authored one book. For context, many professors managed to publish 11 papers in a single year. Now, it's probably then correct to assume that McGill and Gay and the others who are leading America's universities have been selected not for their brilliance, but for their politics and their ability to show their DEI commitments and for their skills as academic political commissars who will enforce the left's narratives on their campuses, creating new generations of professionals and professors to go out and spread the woke word. It's all quite grim and increasingly leads to the sense that American academia, and perhaps Australian academia as well, is hopelessly broken, even with McGill's resignation. The whole edifice, if you ask me, needs to be torn down and restarted, junking woke political classes and fake degrees and getting back to the fundamentals.
Hear, hear, James. And if you happen to be donating to a university that has had those sorts of pro-Palestinian marches since October 7th, I would be advising you to stop funding those universities and put your money elsewhere. Now, Argentina's controversial new leader, Javier Milei, we spoke about him last week. He'll be inaugurated later today. And right here with us, Liberal Democrat in the New South Wales Parliament, John Ruddock, has been invited as a special guest of the President. He joins us now. John, great to see you. You've got the Argentinian flag up behind you. You're sitting there in Buenos Aires. Tell us how you came to be invited.
Well, thank you for having me. Look, I will confess to a degree of imposter syndrome here because I'm going to be here with various world leaders tomorrow, and I'm just a humble little crossbencher in the New South Wales Upper House. But what happened was this. When you're a crossbencher in the New South Wales Parliament, there is a roster of when we get to ask a question to one of the ministers in the government. So about 10 days ago, I was rostered on to ask a question. So I thought, well, okay, I'll ask the Treasurer a question, Daniel Muki. I'll ask him, what does he think about the new president-elect of Argentina? And do you think that the New South Wales government can learn from him? So I got to ask that question. Muki gave quite an entertaining answer. And then I get to give a 3-minute speech and reply at the end of question time. Now, Rowan, that 3-minute reply made the Argentinian 6 o'clock news because the final line was, I said, look, don't cry for me, Argentina is out. Inspire me, Argentina is in.
Fantastic.
So my Twitter account got flooded by all these Spanish speakers from Argentina saying, this is fantastic. Then the next day, 2 members of the incoming administration said, President Milei would like you to come to the inauguration. And at first I was unsure that it was actually legit, but here we are.
So here you are. So will you meet Javier? Tell us that, but also just tell us briefly for viewers what in particular inspires you about Javier Milei.
Well, I am hopeful of meeting him. But look, my little party, we're actually now called the Libertarian Party. So we're no longer the Liberal Democrats. Javier Milei is what libertarians all around the world have been waiting for. He is a radical libertarian. And look, Argentina is a mess economically and in many other ways. There's a lot of parallels between Australia and Argentina. We're both in the southern continent. We've got southern hemisphere. We've got a lot of natural wealth, a lot of European migrants. And the two countries, if you go back to the 1940s, had very similar world-leading living standards. But then Australia largely has stayed on the track of free enterprise. Poor old Argentina has been, tormented by socialism and military dictatorships and hard left, hard right governments. Now, Milei is a brilliant economist. He's written about 50 academic papers, and look, we all like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, all the people that get up every Sunday morning like me to watch The Outsiders. But Reagan and Thatcher were little pussycats with their economic reforms compared to what Javier Milei is intending to do.
Rita.
Well, he's got quite a job. We're looking at inflation over 140% in Argentina. And like you said, this once rich country is now really in all sorts of financial strife. There's all sorts of rumours that Donald Trump is going to be at this inauguration. What are you hearing in Argentina? Are they expecting him? And who else are you expecting to meet? I mean, there would be other world leaders there you'd expect.
Well, the interesting thing about Argentina's foreign policy is that it has for a couple of generations been very much in favour of China and all the baddies around the world, Venezuela, Cuba and everything. Milei has come out and he says, look, we are going to be friends with the United States and we're going to be friends with Western countries. And he's just announced that he's going to pull out of the BRICS thing, which is sort of like the rival to the G20. So he's, he very much wants to, be friends with the West, which is terrific. Now, in terms of Donald Trump, look, I would be thrilled if Donald Trump came here. I have a feeling he won't because, look, he'd sort of overshadow everything. Everyone would be looking at Donald Trump when the focus should be on Javier Milei. But look, there's a lot of world leaders, but the Trump team is setting people down Biden is sending people down. So as far as I know, little old John Ruddick is the sole Australian representative there tomorrow. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, you always put on a good show for Australia, John.
Well,
James.
it's your little Aussie battler there in Argentina. But so tell me, though, John, like you're going to come back to the New South Wales Parliament next year. You're going to have Parliament. You're going to be from the Libertarians. What are the lessons you're going to take from Argentina to New South Wales?
Okay, well, look, Argentina is the lesson about what we don't want to do, but that we have been heading down this track of a much bigger state for a couple of decades. Now, the Liberal Party has been running Australia for most of about 20 of the last 27 years. It's been run by the Liberal Party. But the government keeps getting bigger and bigger. John Howard, the great John Howard, it was the one that introduced middle-class welfare, which is the most absurd notion of all time. And it's very hard to get rid of welfare programs. So I'm saying, look, let's not do what Argentina has done in the past, or we'll end up like Argentina today.
And Javier Milei's great kind of visual gag is the chainsaw. He wants to take the chainsaw to the economy, and he did a terrific thing where he had a big whiteboard with all the names of all the different bureaucracies and public servants, and he went, out, get rid of this one, out, get rid of that one. And I think we could do a lot of that here in Australia. John Ruddock, have a fantastic time there at the Milei inauguration, and I can't think of a better representative of Australia, John, so you have a great time, and thanks so much for talking to us this morning here on Outsiders. Don't go anywhere. Ice Age Watch in a tick. Hello, you're watching Outsiders Weather and the Skeptics Ice Age Watch, the show that likes to occasionally draw on guest contributors in order to examine some of the more arcane, subtle, nuanced and complex aspects of the highly controversial debate on the scientific and philosophical components behind the empirical and observational evidence surrounding what is loosely referred to in the vernacular as climate change. Here is Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy at this week's debate, wading into the swirling waters of the climate debates.
I'll use this to just address a topic we didn't talk about tonight, but I think is one of the most important topics that needs to be discussed. That is this climate change agenda that is shackling this country like a set of handcuffs. I said it at the first debate, and I stand by it. The climate change agenda is a hoax because it has nothing to do with the climate. That's what we have to see. 98% reduction in the climate disaster-related deaths in the last century. 8 times as many people are going to die of cold temperatures this year than warm ones. If you thought COVID was bad, what's coming with this climate agenda is far worse. We should not be bending the knee to this new religion. That is what it is. It is a substitute for a modern religion. We are flogging ourselves and losing our modern way of life, bowing to this new god of climate, and that will end on my watch.
A hoax, eh? Good grief, that's a bit harsh, Vivek. A hoax, honestly? I wonder what evidence Vivek has to reach such a contemptible conclusion. Who knows? What we do know is that COP28, the Global Climate Change Conference, is well underway in the desert kingdom of Dubai. Dubai, in the middle of the world's richest oil kingdom. Surely some mistake, as the satirical magazine Private Eye used to say. Or, as this article in The Advocate succinctly puts it, dystopian satire. COP28 conference hosted by Petrostate. The United Nations Climate Conference COP28 in Dubai has played out like a dystopian satire, says the newspaper. Hosted by a Petrostate, the official facilitator of the proceedings, Sultan Al Jaber is also the chief executive of the United Arab Emirates State Oil Company. If you scripted it, it wouldn't be believable, said the Advocate. Indeed, you'd be accused of overcooking the gags if you included in your dystopian satire that, for example, the UK sent Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to COP28 on a desperate mission to cut emissions. And the UK also, keen to show their recycling credentials, sent recycled former Prime Minister and new Foreign Minister David Cameron to COP28, the ultra-lovey who used to ride to Downing Street on his bike with his police guard in a petrol-guzzling SUV driving behind him. And the UK also sent the man who threatens to destroy our constitutional monarchy through his brazen, reckless and unforgivable political activism, King Charles, to COP28. Did these three brave, climate-loving POMs all travel economy together? No. Did they squeeze into a swish EV limo together? No. Did they chip in and share a ride in a Learjet together? No. They each took their own individual private jet, and indeed, Rishi Sunak was accused of spending more time in the air in that jet than he actually did at the climate conference. The rich vein of hypocrisies. And Vivek calls climate change a hoax. How dare he wash his mouth out? Beats me why. Still, over 70,000 of the world's loveliest lovies flew in by Jumbo or Airbus or private Learjet from all around the globe in order to save the planet. Well, not quite all the lovies, only those whose planes could actually get off the ground. Yes, the curse of COP strikes again. Even this show's powers of satire pale into insignificance compared to the superior talents of Mother Nature to mock the global warming community at every opportunity that presents itself. Meanwhile, over in Ireland, climate-lovey and Labour politician Aidan O'Riordan is insisting that the days of you hopping in your car and tootling off down to the local shops are over for the residents of modern European cities because of global warming.
So where we're going into the future. There's a lot of, I think, political cowardice around this across the chamber. But certainly we cannot expect in a modern European city in which I live that we can hop in our car whenever we want, drive wherever we want and park wherever we want, regardless of how damaging that is for the environment. Those days are over.
Okay, so that's the end of the cars, I guess. Maybe he's got a point, however, because meanwhile, on a completely unrelated note to anything to do with global warming, of course, over in Utah, the residents of Littlewood are already finding it near on impossible to hop on into their own cars and head on down to their own shops. It seems to be a common problem. Here they are in Moscow too, struggling to get down to their shops in their cars. Interestingly, according to the climate skeptic Electroverse, extreme cold has set in across the majority of Russia's 17 million square kilometres territory, with minus 60 degrees Celsius forecast for this week, making this the third consecutive year that the country has suffered a big early December freeze, minus 61.1 in Dalyanka on December 8th, 2021, and minus 61 degrees Celsius at Olimicron last December 12th. An early minus 58.7 degrees hit the city of Yema on December 5th, the city's coldest December temperature in more than 40 years. Meanwhile, here on the east coast of Australia, we suffered through an absolute scorcher yesterday. As the Sydney Morning Herald reported on its front page, oh, hang on, that was the Sydney Morning Herald from December 1957, when Sydney hit nearly 43 degrees. Bizarrely, that was before catastrophic global warming. There you go. Anyway, according to the Washington Post, parts of Siberia are enduring extreme cold below minus 70 degrees, which is the coldest December weather in decades in some areas, and may not relent for another week, which should just about take us to the end of COP28. That's me attempting some satire for you. Meanwhile, back in Britain, Rishi puts the EV into revolt as he suffers a major Tory rebellion and revolt over net zero, and he has to rely on Labour votes to push through his electric cars quota schemes. Looks like Rishi's net zero plans are struggling to get off the ground, much like those private planes heading to COP28. What would Paul McCartney say? Hyperbole, extreme exaggeration. What have you got for us, Rita?
Well, I've got a Greens MP, New South Wales Greens MP, Jenny Leong, who's reposted this image of Tanya Plibersek. I think she's being interviewed here, and someone nearby is holding up a sign, as you can see, that Tanya supports genocide. And this image is doing the rounds on X, formerly Twitter. But it brings home the problem Labor have here, because a lot of us are looking and noticing how weak they are, how they're not adequately pro-Israel, but even the response they've taken is upsetting some of that base. Of course, we know there's a lot more Muslims in Australia than there are Jews, but I think it's far bigger than that. It's that hard left base.
Absolutely.
So the problem with Rita and Rowan is that, they've got two problems here. They've got in the inner city seats like Sydney, where Tanya Plibersek sits, and a lot of the Teal seats, and a lot of sort of, even in Anthony Albanese's inner west seat of Grainler, you've got a huge Greens push. The Greens have made anti-Zionism part of their entire political project. They're virulently anti-Israel. A lot of anti-Semitism shot through all of that. And then at the same time, you go out to their Western Sydney seats, places where, folks like Jason Clare and Tony Burke, all of their seats in Western Sydney, large Muslim populations, very sympathetic to Palestine, very anti-Israeli as well. They are morally compromised on this. It's only people like Bill Shorten who's been able to see a way through on this for Labor. But otherwise, Labor is now looking like they have to let Israel, or they think they have to let Israel out to dry, rather than standing for principle and going for what I think, most normal Australians would want.
This is why Peter Dutton will win the next election, because several of those Teal seats will fall, and it will be on this issue, Rita.
Possibly. You know what? I don't want them to focus on the Teals. I want them to focus on the outer suburbs, where their new homeland's going to be, regional areas. Those Teal seats are not the future of the Liberal Party.
Global warming, James?
Oh, I just love this here. 6 weeks ago, the Associated Press said, we're never going to see snow again. We're never going to have any world ski competitions. And, the lack of ski means, we can't have these ski things. Well, guess what? They've just cancelled the World Cup of skiing. You know why?
No snow?
Too much snow! Too much snow!
Hey, fantastic.
No.
And finally, just very quickly, keep cash alive. Stop the CBDC. There is a website. The goal is to reach 20,000 signatures. Your support is needed. Go to citizengo.org/endnode. Anyway, Google Keep Cash Alive, Stop the CBDC. Very important. Get behind that.
What
Keep
is
your cash.
CBDC?
Central bank digital currency. We do not want those. We'll talk about it next week. See you next week on Sunday, 9 a.m. We'll talk about CBDCs. Until then, have a great day. Bye.